Okay, in episode 5 of our writing series, we looked at DBQ support. You can go back on the video and check that out. I think there's a lot of good stuff in there, good examples. I showed the rubric in there, so if you haven't looked at that, it just helps look at it. An AP class and especially writing rewards those who are just kind of thinking about how can I get better at this, and instead of just thinking like, okay, well, what am I supposed to do for this assignment? But yeah, the more you look at this, the easier everything becomes. All right. So yeah, episode 5 was about DBQ support. And I know that this is not easy, and so I think it would help to see what this looks like. So we tried to show that with some examples, and then so I thought that I would showcase an example of a DBQ that I've made up, and I'll just kind of walk you through what I think good support looks like. All right, here we go. So, our main point, 2 main points. As a teacher, I think I see writing examples tend to help, and so we try to look at them from many different directions. From your peers, from the AP gives us examples, and then sometimes I write too. So, the second main point, maybe this is even the bigger one, is that there are deliberate ways of going about supporting your argument in a DBQ. So if we look at it, we got 3 things to do. You can't forget the CK. Still got to do that. That's 1. Number 2, you use the documents as evidence, almost as basic evidence. That's pretty easy because they're giving you the documents. The third thing is the toughest, and that is sourcing the documents. Bringing it, like weaving in discussions of audience and purpose, things like that. And but the one thing that I just want to point out that where that's in a way like an advantage is because they're looking for you to analyze. So it's almost like they're just kind of telling you to analyze this way. So it almost kind of reminds you like, oh yeah, I need to analyze. So if you're doing that right, you're providing the analysis that they want to see. All right. So DBQ directions. I know it's a lot. Remember, these are not really my directions. I'm just translating them for you, so that you could be successful on the AP exam. So on the AP exam, they require you to do all these things with the documents and the CK and then the context and all that stuff. So we've just been working on how to do that. So yeah, I know it's a lot of moving parts. It does feel overwhelming. That's why we've taken on this stuff like a little bit at a time. So let's work with this DBQ. It's one that I made up, and it's we haven't covered this material yet, but I think you're familiar with the civil rights movement in general. And so the question is, evaluate the extent of success in civil rights from 1900 to the period, from the period 1900 to 1968. All right. So, yeah. So the directions. So how am I going to go about doing this? All right. Let's see. Remember that you're going to choose one of the 4 sourcing elements per document. So you don't have to do more than 1 per document. I think you got that. Please use the name of the sourcing element or a synonym. Do not quote the documents. This is a little bit of review here. Yeah, the readers know what's in the documents, and to be honest, they just think it's silly if you're spending 20% of your essay on quoting things they already know. If you're doing that, they think you don't really know much about this, so you're just kind of taking up space, and so they really look down upon that. And then like how to cite it, you can do it in one of 2 ways. So there's the ways are down there. You can pause this to see that, but there they are. Those are the 2 ways. You'll see those in my examples. Okay, so the first thing I'm going to do with this question, again, here's the question. So civil rights from 1900 to 1968. So what do I know about this? Let's go to here. Okay. Well, first of all, let's follow the protocol. What is this? Well, I think it's like a continuity change over time question. And what I really see, I think, when I think about this topic, I think about change. I think a lot changed in that period of time, and I think that's what the author of the question wants me to focus on. I've made this point before, and I'll make it again. AP always wants you to talk about like why things are happening. So this isn't just me inferring what they say. They say this, that even if it's a continuity change over time, in this case it'd be change over time, they want and expect you to explain why things are changing. They don't just want you to chronicle the changes. That's nice. But they really, you know, again, if you're in the realm of analysis, you're going to be explaining why these changes are happening. So that's here we go. So your mission. So as I think about this, I'm saying, here's what I'm writing to myself, jotting down. I know that there's a change. Something happens. You know, a lot of legislation's passed by the end of that period, and so my job is to tell an analytical story. But I think I'm going to make like why there was a change. That's going to be the center of gravity for me. I think that's where the real action is. Why was at the beginning of this period there was no change, and at the end there's like a fair amount of change. Okay, now I'm going to get to number 2. Now notice this is a big point. I've made it before, and I'm making it again right now. Don't look at the documents first. Do questions 1 and 2 first on our protocol, and then look at the documents. Why? Because it'll help you remember the CK, and when your essay is grounded in CK, then you're in charge. A lot of times, if students just look at the documents, all they can think of, and then suddenly, like the documents are in charge of the essay. They're just dragging you around. So start by doing this. So let me think about what I know from this. So I'm just going to dump, some CK on here. So first of all, in the early period, I wonder if they're saying 1900, because in the early period, there's the NAACP is formed. So that's something. But I remember, like, even like we're studying progressivism now, one point that I've made, I think, is that there are attempts to bring about some things like anti-lynching laws to Congress. And it's like dead in the water. The federal government is not willing to do anything like that, unfortunately. Then I think of like the Brown versus Board decision. I think of Martin Luther King and how he's like a citizen, just like you and me, but he rises up and leads and articulates a really, great vision, great strategy for the movement. When I think of federal action or change, I think of federal action happening, and I think of Little Rock, where in 1957 President Eisenhower sends the Army into a school to enforce integration. So that's an example of the federal government at work there. I also think about the Civil Rights Act of '64 that integrates all public places, outlaws segregation. I also think about the March on Selma, Alabama, and how they were protesting the right to vote, for the right to vote, and that was directly led to the Voting Rights Act of '65. I also think about the riots, and there's some white backlash at the end of this period. So I wonder if that's going to come into my question. So let me look at the documents now. So, hey, look at that. Actually, some of the CK that I was thinking about actually is in the documents, and that happens. Often AP thinks they pick some obvious topics that we wish we could use as CK, but that's all right because we don't really need that much CK anyway. We just need, just a bit to anchor our supporting paragraphs. So, so there's some stuff in here that I didn't write down, like the Kerner Commission. There's this Birmingham demonstration. I did mention MLK, but I didn't mention this stuff here. So, okay, I think I can work with these documents. And, all right, here we go. Okay, so first of all, so now I'm thinking of outlining it. Here's my outline. So I have an outline, and then I'm going to have a thesis. Again, feel free to pause things along the way. So here's how my mind just thinks about this analytical story. I have this here. I kind of jotted it down for myself so I remember what I'm doing. So I'm going to tell like a beginning, turning point, end. That's a good way of structuring any change over time. beginning, not the outcome that we want, turning point, and then the end is where we see, a lot of action, big change. So I'll just walk you through what my whole essay would be. I'm not gonna write the whole essay, but I'll just walk you through it. So early 20th century, I would say that it's a start. That there's an establishment of some sort of movement, but there's no big legislation. So there's the founding of the NAACP, and then look at this. I just jotted down that I think like if I do use that document, I think purpose would be a good sourcing element, because it was the purpose of the NAACP is to bring about civil rights. Then here's the CK that I would use to kind of, again, my purpose in using the CK is to show that this is the kind of before and not much is happening here. Then we get to the 1950s and there's a turning point. So I'd start with CK. Now notice a lot of times, like if you start a paragraph with CK, that helps. You don't always have to do that. So notice that I did that here, but I didn't. You don't have to start with CK. But notice it's like a mix of CK the documents. You're kind of using them both. Well, you're using them both as evidence. So here's what I have. So in part 2 here, this is the turning point. So as I'm jotting this down, I'm noticing like here's why this change is happening. I'm thinking about why. It's a combination of citizen action and federal action. That's the crux of it. So I feel like that might be actually the center of gravity for me, is that's the whole point of this essay, is it takes a combination of citizen action kind of pushing the federal government and then sympathetic people in the government to say, okay, we can't stand by and let this go. Anyway, so here's my evidence. Double V is this idea that after World War II, African American troops said, yeah, we want to beat the Nazis for sure. That's victory number 1. But then we when we come home, we have to do something about, sort of petition this government that we're fighting for, to bring about change in civil rights, because it's far too long. So it's 1945 when this idea of double V comes out. And so then, so the citizens kind of get together, the NAACP, and they bring this suit against the Topeka, Kansas Board of Education. It's called Brown versus Board. It's maybe the most famous of the Supreme Court. And I'm going to use that as evidence to show that, hey, citizens, here they kind of came together, and then NAACP momentum, they bring about this suit, and guess what? The federal Supreme Court acts. Now, I have a dash here because I think I'm just going to use this as evidence. I'm not going to source it. CK2, Little Rock. Yeah, that's where it's a great example of the federal government taking an action, which, again, is one of the points of I think, my whole paper. And then document 4, MLK, he outlines this strategy that, hey, we're going to be peaceful. We're going to stick to like core democratic values, and we're going to be peaceful, but we're going to push to bring about change. And, I'm familiar with this document. When he writes it, he's really writing it to white America. So I'm going to talk about audience, and he's explaining, why there are all these demonstrations. So this is the 1950s. Then we get to the 1960s, I should say 60s, and this is where like the real change comes. And so again, we see a combination of citizen action, federal action, but now we're seeing even more results. This helps that Brown versus Board says all schools need to be integrated, but the schools, of course, they kind of drag their feet on that. It takes a long time to see change, and now we start to see it in the 60s. So I'm going to start out with this photograph of this violent photograph of a demonstration where these police are releasing the dogs onto civil rights protesters. And so I'm going to show that. And the purpose there is to show the national audience what the moral issues are here. I think the journalists who are taking these photographs, they have a purpose there. Then I remember, this is actually one of my favorite speeches of all time in APUSH. And JFK, he's forced to address the country. He goes on TV and he calls civil rights a moral issue. he says it's a moral issue, and it is clear as the Constitution, as he says, that that we should treat all of our citizens equally. And so he calls for a Civil Rights Act that would outlaw segregation, and a year later that passes. And I put a dash there because I think I'm just going to use that as evidence. And then another piece of CK. Here, look at this combination of citizen action and federal action. There's a march, and then there's the Voting Rights Act of '65. And then I'm going to end with this Kerner Commission, Document 7, which is this federal commission that kind of outlines and talks about like the race problem in America. So I'm going to go back to purpose here. So notice, like, there are 4 sourcing elements. I use purpose twice and audience twice. Or actually I use purpose 3 times and audience once. That's fine. You could do that. All right. So here I go. So now this is me sort of taking my notes about how I'd organize it. Now, after I've done that, I think I've come to a good thesis statement. So here it is. So again, remember this. With your thesis, try to find the center of gravity. Where's the action with this question? And so here it is. While the civil rights movement began modestly, not many gains early, by the mid-1900s, a combination of citizen action and federal action brought about tangible change. So notice I'm saying that there was change, but now I'm explaining why, and it's because of this combination. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take this paragraph, which is the most consequential one, the biggest one, and I just typed it out. So I developed a whole paragraph based on all this. So you can pause it, but here it is. So this is section 3, and I'll walk you through it. Well, you could pause it and read it. Maybe why don't you just read it real fast? You can pause it. Oops. Get rid of it. Okay, you're done pausing now. So I want to show you what I did. I took the CK that I use for supporting evidence, so I color-coded it. That's going to be in yellow. I took the documents that I use as supporting evidence, and that's in green. And then the sourcing the documents is also in green, but I also cap to show which element I'm using, and I underline that sourcing explanation. So when I get into my sourcing, so these are the 3 things that you have to do for support: CK, docs as evidence, and then sourcing the docs. So here's what it looks like when it's color-coded. Now I'll walk you through the logic of what I did. Here's my topic sentence, which notice that my essay is about change, and all my topic sentences speak to that. So I'm telling an analytical story, and I'm pointing out here that tangible change finally comes in the 1960s. I'm starting out with document 5, and I'm pointing out that, notice how I'm linking it back to document 4. Now, if I had written this whole essay, document 4 would be in section 2, but I'm showing that this event, document 5 is, imagine like a photograph of this protest, these dogs, attacking the demonstrators. I'm showing that this is an example of the MLK strategy that he outlined of, pushing for rights, but they're being peaceful about it. And then, the citizens of Birmingham stepped up to exercise, so I'm kind of explaining it here. And this disturbing pic from the Associated Press was aimed at a national audience. So the journalists are trying to, journalism in the form of pictures, TV, force the rest of the country to confront the moral problems of Southern segregation. This is true. Like, people in the North, they couldn't really ignore this anymore. It kind of reminds me of what happened with Uncle Tom's Cabin. Like, it brought this moral problem to their living rooms. And then, so here's more CK, where this forces President Kennedy to address the issue of civil rights. And so for the first time a president came on TV to do this, he asked Congress to act. And then, so here's more green as, the document 6 is evidence. So here's, I'm using parentheses to cite it. Other times I've put it right into the sentence. And then I'm going to go back to use some more CK. So I have 2 pieces of CK here. One is here, and one is here. It's like a little combo one here, where the March on Selma and the Voting Rights Act. They like one leads to the other, so I'm just going to kind of group them together. And so then I'm providing some big picture analysis here for the reader, so that the reader sees that I'm keeping my eye on the big picture. And here it is: these 2 acts in 2 years by the federal government finally ended white control of the South 100 years after the Civil War ended. And then I have one more document that I need to do, so I'm gonna put in this last one, this Kerner Commission document. So in 1968, the federal government, I'm telling the story about the federal government. Here they just passed these 2 huge bills, but then they try to go one step further, and with this Kerner Commission, and they're trying to change the hearts and minds of people. Which is hard. Sometimes that's harder to do, or that is harder to do than to pass a law. So what this document does is it outlines the deep social divisions, and here we go. So then now I'm going to use it as evidence that they're saying America would not, become a truly just land without changing the prejudices of white America. That's what the commission argued. Race would, if that doesn't change, race would continue to be a contentious issue. So notice I have an extra comma in there, a little typo, but it's okay. The College Board, when they grade this, they expect to see some mistakes. You saw a couple of my mistakes through here. So it doesn't have to be perfect, it just has to be good. I think this is pretty good. You can pause it, kind of look at this, but so this is what I mean by they're deliberate things that we can do. So you can do these things. You can study this. You can study the some of the essays we looked at. In the email that I sent out, there's one of the DBQs that we talked about. There's an example. We look at the example in class. In 5th hour, I asked for them back, but I'm providing that essay here, so you can study it. The more examples, the better. So there are my 2 points. Examples help, and we can do this. There are deliberate ways of supporting your argument, and you just have to study it, and then think about it as you're doing it. So thank you. We'll see you tomorrow. And again, you can always come in for one-on-one help. I've been having some really fantastic conversations with students, like a little 10 minutes, like a one-on-one time, and it seems like it helps. So you guys have been doing a great job. I'll see you tomorrow. Thanks.